Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 19th of August. As always, we encourage you and your family and your community to stay aware of the weather in your community and village. You can do that easily by staying up to date with your local weather observations and your weather forecast, brought to you every day online at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. You can listen in on NOAA Weather Radio, Marine VHF, as you please. The Weather Info line also does the trick at 800-472-0391. If you write down the numbers as you go, you can dial them in a little bit faster the next time around. No need to listen to the entire menu. On Facebook, you can find out more information about the weather around Alaska and even in your neck of the woods at NWS Alaska. Today we were talking about what made some of those thunderstorms severe yesterday across the Matanuska Valley, and apparently it's just pouring again. NWS Alaska and AKwx for the hashtag, a great way to watch the information on Twitter. And Twitter has a really neat feature too. If you set that to text you, if you like to be alerted when bad weather is in your area or when the National Weather Service says something of note, you can certainly do that. Just tell Twitter to let you know when we tweet. And you can do that for NWS Fairbanks, NWS Juneau, NWS Anchorage, Oregon, NWS Alaska. And on YouTube, you get your daily afternoon map briefing. Simply search for AKwx there. Or after this show, you can watch the complete Alaska Weather Show on the AKwx TV channel. Now, here's the way it looks for hazardous weather tonight. We don't have any heavy rain issues at the moment, but we do have enough warm water and perhaps a potential release of the Mendenhall Lake and the glacial dammed lake there around Suicide Basin, because it appears to be releasing again as the Mendenhall Lake has been rising throughout the day. As of about 3 o'clock, it was about 8.5 feet. About 9 feet is when we start to see some issues there around the West Glacier Spur Road near Skater's Cabin and flow into the Mendenhall Lake Campground. So right now, the National Weather Service office in Juneau is saying there is a flood watch. So that simply means watch out. There could be flooding. If that turns into a warning, if you're along that lake or the river and you're in those flood-prone zones, it's time to do something about that. Get out of the way. But since it's a watch, that means it's a good time to think about what you need to do and prepare ahead of time. So if you need to get a couple things together because those changes happen quickly, go ahead and do that now. And watch out, because flooding could take shape. If you get a warning, then it's time to go. An advisory is a lesser level of alert, but still one that you need to pay attention to. And if you get that advisory alert, then also make sure that you're ready to go and move if the authorities say it's time to move. But again, the latest level was around 8.5 feet. 9 feet is when we start to see flooding from the Mendenhall Lake and the river there. So pay attention to that if you're in the Suicide Basin in southeastern Alaska. Now let's look out to the west and talk about precipitation and chances coming in from the Pacific. At this time of the year, it is not unusual at all to see spinning areas of clouds moving across the central and western Pacific, and we're just getting the top edge here in the scan of 2 typhoons across the central and western Pacific. Other waves of moisture that are evident here from remnants and pieces of storms that haven't really held together. You can see that moisture streaming northward. Here's on Alaska, here's Shemya, and then here is the eastern coast of Asia. And this moisture again is moving north and northeast, heading into the jet stream that is feeding all of this into the Gulf of Alaska. Along with this comes a lot of warm air and instability, and all of this that works its way into the Gulf certainly has the capability of producing some heavy rainfall. We've seen that just in the last couple days or so around Sitka, with 4 mudslides in the region as conditions continue to slowly improve there. Hopefully everyone will stay safe from this point on. Out across the north, and you can see areas around south central, again with bubbling clouds coming up today with instability, showing showers and thunderstorms. Instability is just a word we use that is telling us the atmosphere is unstable. That means we have cold air at the top, warm air at the bottom, and just like in your oven, in your kitchen, you have convection. and that rising air bubbles up through the atmosphere, taking moisture with it. As the moisture gets higher, it cools down and becomes visible. The water vapor condenses into clouds. If the clouds are big enough and they are tall enough, they can produce lightning, which produces thunder, of course, and can produce hail. And that downdraft, or the cooler air rushing down and out from the thunderstorm, can also produce some gusty winds. So we were seeing some of that in south central Alaska yesterday. For many of us in south central, that is an uncommon experience. For many in the interior, going, it's a thunderstorm, Dave, who cares? We see them all the time. Yeah, you would be right. They're far more common in the interior for sure. South central, not the case. Southeast, you get your fair share of thunder and lightning, mainly along the coastal areas, but it doesn't look like that's in the cards for you tonight, as a lot of warm and wet air is still coming in. You can see a little bit of a break earlier today across the coastal areas here. Here comes another surge, though, with another wave of low pressure. So rain is coming back if you're in southeastern Alaska, and drier air is trying to work its way into the Bering Sea with more stable features showing up on the satellite picture. You can see an area of low pressure here, but it looks like a lot of marine stratus and probably some fog in there as well. Now on the north slope, we were seeing pictures of snow today up around parts of the northern coast. A little bit of cold enough weather there for a little bit of rain and snow to mix in the last 24 hours, and no reason that can't happen again as high pressure is parked across the Beaufort Sea at this hour. Low pressure out across the western Bering at 1,008 millibars, allowing warm and wet air to travel north. Of course, as it runs into cooler and drier high pressure, those temperatures drop fairly quickly. High pressure across southwestern Alaska at 1,027 millibars, allowing showers to form just underneath there across some of the higher terrain of southwest. Rain and thunder across south central again today, and a few areas of drizzle left behind. Bettles got a pretty good soaker in the last 24 hours, over a ½ inch of rainfall for your area. And low pressure out across the western Gulf and North Pacific, lifting northward tonight at 1,017 millibars. That boundary is going to slowly creep into the western Gulf as we head into tonight. Watch for periods of light rainfall possible across the northern parts of southeast and the higher terrain. Out across the west, conditions should be drying up across south central and southwestern Alaska as low pressure is dragging in some drier air down through Cook Inlet. Watch for showers across the interior. A little bit of mixing could take shape up across the north coast later tonight. And the main feature on the map in the west will be low pressure west of St. Matthew. Look for a pretty steady and healthy southerly flow as you go into St. Matthew and the Pribilofs and St. Lawrence Island going through tonight. As we get into Thursday, low pressure is creeping eastward out in the Bering, and we don't really see much of a really focus again for that big surge of warm air lifting northward, but it will be a rainmaker across the west. That includes Norton Sound and Nome and Kotzebue Sound. Across Arctic Village down to Eagle and generally north and east from Fairbanks, you'll see a better chance for showers there, and a little bit closer to the Alcan border in the eastern Brooks Range, a better chance for maybe a few thunderstorms too. Low pressure across the western Gulf is lifting that warm and wet air back toward Kodiak, but it looks like most of it's not going to make it on Thursday. It looks like most of the showers should stay just to the south. This will continue northward by Friday, and a few showers could develop across central and northern parts of southeast for Thursday. But as we get into Friday, you might catch another break, another round of drier air right ahead of the next wave of low pressure there for Friday that's moving through the Gulf. So with this comes a return to that south and westerly flow. Remember, we were looking at the satellite picture and we kind of drew a line with that Pacific moisture. So Pacific moisture is kind of heavy back in this system again. And if you're in southeast, you're going to want to watch for more periods of rain as we get into Friday. A lot of this, though, if you're in southern and coastal areas of south central Alaska, probably won't affect a whole lot more than the coast. That's our current thinking right now, is that this was going to really stay out of the Cook Inlet region and probably focus on Prince William Sound and Seward, and Homer and Kodiak, and the Pacific coast of the Alaska Peninsula. So this will probably focus a lot more on southeast. For northwestern Alaska, showers and periods of rain for some of the higher terrain of the Brooks Range. And once again, we're back into pink mode here just north of the Arctic coast. And that indicates a chance for rain and snow to mix. When we have snow in the forecast, we'll draw that in with blue. High pressure sitting across the central and western chain at 1,032 millibars to wrap up the week. And with that comes an opportunity for fog and heavy stratus across the Bering. Showers for the central and eastern chain, and maybe some light rain and fog just to the south of the Aleutians out in the west. That's a look through the end of the week. Here's temperatures now across southeastern Alaska, upper 50s and lower 60s through most of the panhandle earlier today. Haines and Skagway made it above 60 degrees. Sitka was holding at 59 by 3 o'clock. Low to mid 60s for Ketchikan and Annette. Hyder was showing 63 degrees. Juneau also close to 60 today, 62 in Yakutat. Prince William Sound was mainly dry with temps in the lower 60s today. Seward, one of the, if not the warmest spot in the entire state at 74. Pretty mild day for you. On the other side of the mountains there, 59 in Homer, 66 in Kenai, and 67 degrees in Anchorage. Mild as well up through the Susitna Valley. The Matanuska Glacier was showing 46, but down the road around Golcanna and Glen Allen, temps were pretty close to 60 degrees today. Fort Greely was 52, Healy showing 54, 53 in Fairbanks today, 48 for Fort Yukon, and 55 in Eagle. 30s and 40s for the eastern parts of the Brooks Range. The Anaktuvuk Pass region was about 45, 39 though in Arctic Village, and upper 30s from Kaktovik all the way out to Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse and to Point Barrow as well as Atkasuk. As you head down toward Wainwright, temps were in the lower 40s. Kotzebue Sound temperatures made it into the mid to upper 40s around Kivalina and warmed up even more toward Kotzebue. 50 around Nome today, 57 in Galena, and then south and west toward Kaltag, you've got 60 degrees there, 54 in Grayling, and temps around Sparavon were in the lower 60s today with Lake Iliamna at 64, Bethel 57, Nunivak Island around 54 degrees, lower 50s for both St. Paul and St. George, Bristol Bay on either side of 60 degrees this afternoon with Cape Newenham at 51. The Alaska Peninsula saw temperatures ranging from about 58 degrees on the southern tip to about 70 around Sand Point, 57 in Chignik, and 10 degrees warmer than that up the road in Kodiak with lower 50s for Adak, Atka, and Shemya. So everyone got a little bit of something today. Now, overnight low temperatures tonight will be back in the mid-40s for most of the middle Tanana Valley, and downstream you don't see a whole lot of change all the way out into the YK Delta. Upper 40s for Bristol Bay, 52 in Kodiak, lower 50s as well for most of southeast. Prince William Sound will be in the mid-40s with the Cook Inlet region also in the lower 40s, including Fairbanks. A little bit milder as you head up toward Talkeetna at 45. Seward and Homer both in the 40s tonight, 52 in Kodiak. North of the Brooks Range, you're back in the 30s. In fact, most of the Arctic coast will be just below freezing from Barrow eastward. West of that, and the Chukchi Sea will keep you milder tonight. Lower to mid-40s for the Kotzebue Sound region, and Nome, you're looking at 45. St. Paul, about 46. As we go into tomorrow, expect highs near 60 around Fairbanks, upper 60s, and another mild day for south central Alaska, including Anchorage in the upper 60s. Southeast, upper 50s to lower 60s. The outer coast, a little bit milder there with some of the inner coastal areas closer to the 60-degree mark. 62 in Kodiak. Looks like most of the peninsula will be in the upper 60s and upper 50s and lower 60s. St. Paul, 52. Nunivak Island, 54. Bethel, close to 60 degrees. 52 in Nome and 39 in Barrow for your Thursday. On to flying weather now. We see a widespread area of MVFR across the North Slope and across the Alcan border. For the Seward Peninsula, Norton Sound and Kotzebue Sound expect MVFR, but IFR will flirt with your western coastline as well as cover up a good chunk of the Pribilofs, especially in the morning tomorrow. Central and western parts of the chain under IFR, and we may see IFR across some of the higher terrain, including Hyder and down toward Ketchikan and Annette throughout the morning hours with some improvement in the afternoon. Your passes look like this. Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass are expected to be marginal throughout a good chunk of your Thursday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass are expected to see improvements throughout your Thursday. VFR is expected by the afternoon in Rainy Pass and for Windy Pass for Thursday. For Isabel Pass, expect to start at marginal conditions with VFR by the afternoon. Mentasta Pass also looks to improve during your Thursday. Tenita Pass looks to be mainly VFR throughout the day. And as we get into Portage Pass, VFR conditions should prevail there, especially on the western side. And Chilkoot and White Pass, we expect to see improvements during your Thursday, but a start at MVFR should be expected. Now, freezing levels, well, we see rain and snow across the North Slope, and it's not a surprise to see that surface freezing line dipping down to almost the eastern Brooks Range summits. Above that, 2, 4, and 6,000 foot lines are showing up as far south as the Alaska Range and Bethel. And then once you get into south central Alaska, those freezing levels rise to about 8, 10, and even 12,000 feet as you head out and south of the Dixon entrance. Icing potential is growing a little bit across the Bering Strait, with warm and wet air being pumped northward on that south and westerly flow, and cold air meeting up with that. And you still have to climb a little bit higher up there to get into the light to occasional moderate, but the threat is growing, so keep your eye on that out across the west and across the Beaufort Sea coast, generally above 6,000 feet for any substantial light to isolated moderate, but we were getting reports across the North Slope and across Southwest and across South Central just in the last 24 hours of occasional or light rime there, so don't be surprised if that shows up. And across Southeast, we're going to watch some exiting moisture that's moving to the south and east that's capable of producing some light to isolated moderate. The jet stream has our favorite dip out across the eastern Bering Sea. This is allowing that cooler storm pattern to drop across southwest, south central, and southeastern Alaska. The cooler air is being reinforced by a little bit of a faster push of air across the North Slope. That's traveling around 60 knots. And we're going to see several disturbances coming out of the West Pacific, each one of these adding moisture to the storm situation across the North Pacific and the Gulf of Alaska in the coming days. Tomorrow's 9,000-foot winds show a southwesterly flow coming into the Gulf. We've got a little bit of a ridge showing up at 9,000 feet right now that is guiding in those northwesterlies fairly lightly across southeast. Wind speeds a little bit stronger across the Yukon Valley and the northern interior, 25 knots or so. They're also blowing in from the south and west across the North Slope. At 3,000 feet, our ridge is not quite as pronounced. The wind speeds moving across southeast, coming in around 10 to 20 knots from the north and west. We have winds blowing from east to west across the Brooks Range in the west, and across the lower and middle Yukon Valley, as well as the Kobuk and Noatak valleys. So when you put that all together, the turbulence shows up generally in light form around the Dixon entrance below 6,000 feet. And across the central and eastern chain, including Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, and west of the Pribilofs above 4,000 feet. Those seem to be the only major concerns we have for wind or turbulence tomorrow. All that aside, it's probably a good day or an improving day to fly where you are tomorrow, but always check the weather first before you head out. Let's look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with a look at your marine weather here in the Ice Edge in just a few minutes.
What is it about the ocean that attracts so many of us? We like to play in it, get our food from it, build our houses near it, and gaze out at it. Our economy depends on the goods that come in and go out through our major ports. The ocean makes us feel good, contributes to our economic growth, and we like to be close to it. It's not surprising then that almost half of our population lives near the coastline. But working and playing along the coast is not always serene. Powerful coastal storms can raise the water level significantly, 20 feet or even more, causing loss of life, destroying homes, businesses, and property. Hurricanes like Katrina and Ike showed us firsthand the risks that coastal communities face.
It was 32 feet. We went through the first floor to the second floor, through the attic. The water came up to us like here on the roof. And we talking about swimming to the tree. And luckily, it subsided.
With ocean waters warming and sea levels rising, it is likely that the U.S. will encounter future storms equally as harmful and costly. And with so many people living along the coast, the stakes are getting higher each year. Storm destruction is rarely limited to lost lives and property. Instruments collecting water level and meteorological information must be located in harm's way so they can deliver data critical for flooding forecasts and emergency evacuations. But all too often, these stations are damaged or destroyed during the very times we need them. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, has responded to this dilemma by strengthening some of its storm tide stations. Known as NOAA Sentinels of the Coast, these platforms are single-pile, 4 feet in diameter structures that stand at least 20 feet above the sea surface and are driven 60 to 100 feet into the seafloor for stability. For over 200 years, NOAA has monitored the rise and fall of tides using the latest technology. Beginning with human observers in the early 19th century, NOAA has harnessed technology to operate its network of tide stations that automatically collect accurate and reliable data every 6 minutes. Today, NOAA maintains more than 200 permanent water level observing stations. NOAA's goal is to ensure that the public has advance notice based on the most accurate and up-to-date storm tide and meteorological information. This is only possible, however, when the tide stations operate throughout the storm. So Sentinels are designed to withstand a Category 4 hurricane, with winds up to 155 miles per hour and storm surges of nearly 20 feet above normal. Planning, design, construction, and operation required a team of experts in surveying, engineering, pile installation, oceanography, quality control, and web expertise. With new technology, NOAA is better meeting the needs of coastal communities. Lives are often at stake during the 24 hours before a major storm. Once floodwaters begin to rise, it becomes critical to know which evacuation routes are passable.
Having this kind of immediate real-time data up close that our community has access to is critical for us in our day-to-day operations.
Each sentinel will report real-time water level and meteorological observations. Water level measurements are precisely referenced to ensure that coastal communities can make informed decisions to elevate housing, build levees, and plan evacuation routes. In addition to storm tide reporting, the products that result from NOAA's instruments also contribute to safe navigation, accurate charting, marine engineering, sea level change monitoring, and other important activities.
Before we send crews out, we always check the tides, because being in South Louisiana, you have to make sure your barges and boats can get in before you can even begin your work. So the tide information is very important.
The first sentinels were constructed along the Gulf Coast at Calcasieu Pass, Amarada Pass, and Shell Beach in Louisiana, and Bay Waveland in Mississippi. Hurricanes Gustav and Ike tested the sentinels within weeks of installation. Standing strong, they delivered storm tide data, which were used by emergency responders as well as thousands of coastal residents. More sentinels are planned and will be built at exposed coastal locations as funding becomes available. Other stations in less exposed areas will be elevated above storm surge range on substantial structures. Coastal communities must be ever vigilant. Even tropical storms can deal a massive blow to many residents, especially storms that make landfall on a high tide. Sentinels are designed to serve the over 150 million residents of coastal communities, planning for the worst and hoping that we never need those plans. However, if the unthinkable happens, NOAA Sentinels will be there standing tall, providing a safe haven for instruments that are vital to planning for and responding to nature's fury.
You know, we talk about the websites and social media a lot, but the tides and currents page that you just saw there, I believe it's tidesandcurrents.noaa.gov, also works really well on your cell phone. So if you want to check the tides, whether you're on the North Slope or Southwest or South Central or in Southeast, you can find your nearest station there, punch that in, save it on your phone, and you can always call that up, and it works really well on your mobile device. So remember that next time you're looking for tidal information around Alaska. The Sea Ice Edge, weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php is the place to go to get this type of map and this information. It'll look a little bit different, but you can zoom in and customize it the way you like. The Ice Edge here, and the main ice pack is actually got a few thicker spots here. Some of the multi-year ice has dropped down a little bit here, and the melting has slowed down. That was a takeaway that we were talking about yesterday. So again, not the best news there for Kaktovik out toward Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse at this time. As we look at southeastern Alaska, you can see a northwesterly flow coming in behind that recent wave of wet weather. Most of those winds around 20 to 25 knots with 7-foot seas on the outside and 3 to 4-foot seas on the inside. Winds there around 15 knots, and they'll start to organize a little bit more in from the south as we get into Friday, so a change is coming. 15 knots outside the Dixon entrance to as strong as 30 knots outside of Yakutat, with southerlies across the Lynn Canal, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. For south central, winds are going to be considerably less, around 10 to 15 knots in most areas. Inside of Prince William Sound, a northerly flow, northerlies coming down Cook Inlet, and a light and variable wind on either side of Kodiak Island, with 2-foot seas there in the Shelikof Strait, 4-foot seas on the eastern side, becoming northwesterly as we get into Friday. And that's because low pressure is moving back into the central Gulf and strengthening. And as it does so, the winds on the back side of that are going to strengthen as well. 10 to 20 knots with 2-foot seas on the inside of Prince William Sound, 4-foot seas on the north and western coast. And we're looking at 10-knot winds there coming down Cook Inlet with 2 to 3-foot seas on Friday. A light and variable wind inside of Bristol Bay, only 1 foot seas there, 5 foot seas between Castle Cape and Chignik. You'll see winds coming out from the south and west on the Bering Sea coast there, the Alaska Peninsula, about 15 knots there, but blowing the opposite direction on the Pacific coast for Thursday. For Friday, with the storm organizing a little bit more in the Gulf, look for a west and northwesterly flow from Bristol Bay all the way down to the Pacific coast. 5 to 7 foot seas on the Bering Sea coast, 7 to 8 foot seas across the Pacific coast as we go through Friday. Look for a west and northwesterly wind coming across the central and eastern chain. Around Unalaska and Nikolsky, you're looking at 20 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas. A northeasterly flow will remain briefly on Thursday, and that will come around to the west as we get into the afternoon. Look for a northwesterly shift for the central and western chain with 5 foot seas there on Thursday, becoming southeasterly on Friday. Remember, high pressure's parked right out here across the southern Bering Sea, and that gives us a north and westerly wind for the central and eastern chain, 15 to as strong as 25 knots in the eastern locations with 7 to 9 foot seas and as low as 5 foot seas south of Adak and Atka. For the west coast, a southerly flow continues there with winds around 20 knots or so for St. Lawrence Island and Nunivak Island. St. Paul and St. George also looking at southwesterlies, more of a lighter and variable flow in the Kuskokwim Bay. Look for a 2 foot sea there on Thursday, becoming 6 foot seas there for Friday with a north and westerly shift, and westerlies strengthen coming into the YK Delta and the Yukon Delta especially. 6 foot seas around St. Lawrence Island, 7 foot seas for the Pribilofs to wrap up the week. And for the North Slope, light easterly winds again, keeping that ice pretty much right in place. Look for a light easterly wind around Point Barrow, 2 foot seas there from Point Franklin southward all the way to 15 knots from the north and east around Cape Lisburn and Point Hope with a 4 foot sea for Thursday, becoming 2 feet on Friday with a north and easterly wind at 10 knots, and 15 knot winds will be some of the strongest we see around Kaktovik with an easterly flow and 3 foot seas in the open water. That's a look at your marine forecast. Let's recap what's going on around the state tonight. Flood watch in effect around the Juneau area for the Mendenhall River and the Mendenhall Lake, specifically in the Suicide Basin, because there could be a glacial dam release in that region. So a flood watch until further notice. And again, at the first sign of flooding, remove yourself from the area as quickly as possible. But a watch means watch out and be prepared. So if you're in those regions, time to think about what you need to do. Out across the west coast, south and westerlies will be strengthening, adding more wet weather to the west and northern parts of our state, and showers and thunderstorms could be back up north.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.